Hello all, and welcome back to Great Deltan. It's been nearly 8 months now since I last posted, but you join me here today in the garage of my new house with what I hope will be to everyone some exciting updates. A few days ago, on August 30th, we finally completed on our house purchase and got the keys to this place, having waited since January when we first started looking for this place to be built now. During those 8 months, a lot has taken place, so let's rewind quickly back to earlier this year when I last posted, and I'll take you through everything that's happened. So earlier on this year, I announced that I would be moving house and that the layout wouldn't be coming with me and it was most likely to be scrapped. Furthermore, I also planned on selling my entire stock collection to fund the remainder of my deposit, and I'll be taking a long break from the hobby to evaluate whether or not I really wanted to carry on with it in the future, or just to enjoy other layouts for a while really without having to worry too much about my own. Well, the plan pretty much went exactly how I wanted it to. All of the stock sold for pretty much what I asked for it, given the rarity and the work done to most of it, and it gave us the deposit we needed to advance with our mortgage application. There was an added bonus though, as before I started to dismantle the layout itself, I was contacted by someone I'd known for quite a while, having traded some items of stock in the past regarding purchasing the layout. He had recently decided to start modelling again after some time and was looking for a semi-completed layout to buy, and was also an active follower of the channel. Now this layout of course was designed to stay in place, and it used the garage for support, so I never had any intention of moving it. Therefore I had made no joins in the baseboard or track work where it could be taken apart easily. I set about with the angle grinder and cut across the surface of the layout and the track work, then used a wood saw and an electric jigsaw to get through the rest. The main challenge was seeing how much of the layout we could compress into his spare room, as the garage measured 2.5 by 5 metres and the new room, which he planned to have the layout in, was only 3.5 by 2.2, I believe. We knew we'd have to sacrifice some part of it, but in the end we managed to get almost the entire station, plus the M1 and karting scene across. As the countryside scene was already cut off from the rest of the layout, I managed to sell that too as one piece. Someone bought that for use as a diorama. The layout eventually came into 7 different pieces essentially. The station came apart into 2, then there was the karting scene, the M1 and the cutting. They all came into their separate sections, and then lastly the 2 ends of the layout which didn't have any scenery on and were just used as stock passing over them were scrapped, as I had no use for them. A van was hired and the 4 sections were then taken over, and with some difficulty carried up the stairs at the other end into the spare room. I believe I used about between 15 and 20 bags of plaster mould, creating the scenery surrounding the karting scene, each weighing a kilo. So that section was especially heavy, even getting it into the van. I wasn't there on the receiving side, but from what I hear, the buyer and his fiancée nearly collapsed getting it up the stairs. From there on, I popped round a few evenings to help set it up to the point where 4 tracks were running, and then he could just continue on with the scenery, as I don't think he had any intention of changing or adding to the track plan. We did face a number of challenges, one of which was the layout used the garage wall for strength and was never designed to sit upon the framework underneath it, so the whole thing needed levelling and reinforcement. Next was the angle of one of the cuts. In order to make the karting section as small as possible for portability, I had to make an angled cut across the tracks which didn't line up again when we put them back together, as the angle grinder used to make the cut took about 2mm out of the rails. This was overcome by cutting back the rails on each section about 3 inches, scraping the ballast off, and then adding in sort of filler rails to bridge the gap. The curve might not look as good from eye level, but it worked. The last issue was that some sections of track had become dead since they were cut off from the supply after I made the track cuts. This was simply rectified by adding some extra droppers in. So we got it all running, and what I'm going to do now is just talk through the few of the things that he's done to it scenery wise over some photos. So starting back at my garage, you can see the sections that were scrapped. This area in the corner here had no particular scenery, it was basically just track and some ballast. Although it was weathered and I had spent some time on it, it wasn't too much of a loss to bin it. Next we have the end of the station. This is probably the smallest section that went along and the easiest to transport. All of the legs underneath it was all labelled up so they could go back together exactly how it came apart, and it was just a bit easier to transport when it was flat without all the framework underneath it. Next we have the larger section of the station. This was quite a bit heavier. We eventually had to scrap the road underneath it just to get a better curve on it, otherwise it wouldn't have lined up at all. You'll see that in the photos that I'm going to show you in a minute. Next we have the cutting area. This is how it ended up. It was a nice straight cut across the tracks and it was just sitting there doing nothing. It was a perfectly good scene for dioramas or even to add to a layout, so I managed to sell it. And I got a fair bit of interest in it, to be fair. I had several messages and someone collected it the next day, so I'm glad that went and it's seen better use now. Here's just a picture of all the sections sort of sitting as they are before they went over. There's the station. And then we have the karting scene on its side. That whole embankment around the back of the rails was the heaviest part of it all. It just weighed so much, it was ridiculous, and because it was quite a big section as well, it was just not easy to handle, but they managed to get it up the stairs the other end, so can't complain. So here we are. Here's how the room looked when the 4 sections came over. Before we put it all together, it was just sitting there loosely. We hadn't decided where everything was going to go or how we were going to make it work, but we just wanted to get the sections up in the room, and that was one task completed. You can see how small the room was compared to the garage when you see this photo. In the end we had to sort of sacrifice that straight just after the M1 and turn that into a curve because we just didn't have the room to make it work. So the next picture here is when we had the layout all assembled and it was more or less in working order at that point, and he'd started to do some scenery on it. You can see at the front he'd redone the road from my sort of poorly unrealistic painted road. He's put down some scenecraft roads, I think, or there might be some of the botch ones. I can't remember what he told me. He's had a row of housing and shops at the back which look pretty good. They're low relief, and then he's added in a sort of over roof over the station, which goes to show the potential that this station did have when it was in my own ownership. Next photo you can see is how we've made the end of the layout work. So essentially what he's done is the same as me, just had some sort of bridge between the 2 sections of layout to connect the tracks together. And then this is down the other end of the station. He's added in a fire training centre, which looks rather good. Some good weathering and scenic sections on there. And then I think that's a network rail building previous to that, and a warehouse in the distance as well. So yeah, quite happy with what he's done. A couple more photos from eye level. Here's what the station looked like at the point where he actually had to stop the layout and sell it on himself because he had some personal issues he ran into, which is unfortunate because he was making good progress with it. However, life is life, and you've got to do what you need to do. But here's another photo from eye level of the over roof, which looked really good over the 4 tracks in the station. And then here's the modern station building, which he was building. I think that was a kit, I can't remember who by, but that would have looked good. And then here's what they did with the section which connected the 2 areas together. Sort of made a nice embankment down the side with a stream at the bottom. So that's what has become of the old layout. Unfortunately, like I said, due to personal circumstances, he is actually having to sell it on, which is obviously gutted about, but it couldn't be helped, and I believe he has now sold it. On to the present now, and we are all moved in and happy to be in this Linden Homes new build home. About 3-4 miles from where we used to be. You join me from inside the garage of this new home, which is an integrated garage as opposed to a standalone as was the previous. This does, of course, cause an issue in the hours and jobs I can do at certain times due to noise. In the last garage, it was completely separate from the house, but not only that, it was also right next to the Northampton Ring Road. So it didn't really matter what job I was doing or what time, whether it be hammering, drilling, cutting, grinding. Nobody ever heard me. In this garage, I'll need to limit the loud jobs to daytime, as to not disturb the children or the neighbours. We'll talk a bit more about the actual garage now. The space measures 6 by 3 metres, which is a metre longer and half a metre wider than the previous garage, giving an extra floor space of 5.5 square metres, which is of course massive in N gauge. Not only that, but the way the garage door opens in this property is far better than the old one. I'll just show you. If I just open this up. In the old garage, it used to come down as it was turning, which meant I had to cut the layout short to accommodate for the door being able to shut. But in this one, it rolls out. It rolls out and then comes in pretty much vertical and just swings in. So I get a lot more space. This essentially means I have roughly 1.3 metres extra in length, not just a metre. As with the previous layout, I had to just cut it short. On the outside wall here we have just breeze block, and then on the other two it is completely plastered and sealed. This has actually thrown a spanner in the works with my design, as I originally planned on attaching it to the wall for support as per the previous layout, but I don't want to ruin the plaster, so I'll have to look at building a freestanding structure. There are a couple of obstacles to overcome, such as this gas pipe here and that trim for whatever that's for. And then the waste stack from the ensuite bathroom goes into this big box, which cuts out about 200 by 300 mil, so I'll have to overcome that as well. That's the only space issues I have though, but generally it's a great space to work in, and it's quite a lot bigger than the other one. In terms of power, we have a double socket on the far wall there, and then next to it we have a second 13 amp socket. But it is on a separate circuit, as the developer actually installed the wiring capable of handling an EV charger. But they don't fit them as standard, so they just blanked it with another socket for now. Should we choose though in the future to install an EV socket, the wiring is already there. There's just one pendant, which will be obviously upgraded at some point to LED batons. So that's enough about the garage, and I guess I should actually talk about where I'm at and what the plans are for the future. The main plan is to, yes, build another layout. This won't be started until at least next spring, as there's lots I'd like to get done in the house, and financially I haven't really got a great deal behind me to go spending hundreds and hundreds on this hobby again right now. I do, however, plan to slowly build up a few stock items within the next 6 months, so that when I do start building something, I'll actually have some stock to run. This wagon here is the only piece of stock I have left, and the only reason I do have it is because I lost it, or I didn't even realise I had it. I'll sell these usually in batches because it's only about 10 or 12 pounds a wagon, and when you take into account your postage and having to package it and go to the post office, it's just not worth the money you get at the end of it, so I just decided to keep it. Other than that, I have a few special tools I specifically bought for modelling and some paints, but other than that I really am starting completely from scratch. I don't even have an airbrush anymore. This, however, I see as a good thing, as I can now work on standardising my stock to be at the quality I want them to, for being ready to run on the layout eventually. Starting from scratch means I can set myself a rule of not purchasing any more stock until my current stock is up to standard. The work I plan to do to each piece of stock are things like installing cab drivers, passengers, fitting internal lights and wagon loads, painting interiors of coaches and cabs, weathering, changing couplings to hunt couplings where permissible, adding detailing packs, DCC fitting of course, but also appropriate programming, plus making some better storage trays too. Something I'd also like to look into is fitting stay alives into all of the stock as well, because although this garage is a little bit more protected than the previous layout environments, the track will still get dirty, and I plan on going a bit more in depth with the detail, so track cleaning will be a challenge. Having strong stay alives fitted will allow the track to get a bit more dirty before it becomes unusable, saving me time with constant track cleaning. I haven't yet decided what my first items of stock will be, but I'd like it to be a loco hauled set, so I can take you through every step of upgrading with some videos for at least some form of content. Most of the weathering I'd like to do myself, but for large wagon rakes or challenging stock I'll be using the services of West Coast Models, who did a lot of my stock previously to an excellent standard. So that's the plan for the next few months, and then in the near future I'll be starting a new and hopefully final layout. At some point in 10 to 15 years I believe the wife would like to convert half of the garage to an extra bedroom, but until then I have all of this space to utilise. Something I've always said to myself and other modelers is that there's usually 1, 2 or 3 of the main things holding you back from completing your dream layout: time, space and money. With the first layout I had loads of time, as it was during COVID and my wife was pregnant. I didn't have any kids at the time. I had a fairly good disposable income as we were living cheap in a caravan, but I didn't have a great deal of space as we were living in a caravan, so I only had the garden shed. With the second layout I had the space and I still had enough money because we were doing a lot of overtime to save for the house, and I spent a bit of that on the railway as well. But I barely had any time because I was working so much and I was limited to evenings, and because we had our second child as well, that took even more time up, so that was the time constraint. With this layout, however, I have a huge space and I have a lot of time as both my children are starting school soon, but I don't want to go spending out the ear for it, so I shall be limiting myself to a monthly or weekly budget. This does mean, of course, that I'm going to spend a lot of time on this and it's going to take a lot longer for things to progress, but I'll never end up in a situation where I was before, where I just had bits of stock everywhere because I just couldn't stop buying things. So finally, I suppose I should actually talk about what I have planned for the layout. The unfortunate answer is that at the moment I have very little in the way of ideas. I know what features I want on it, and the era/region will still remain the same, but in terms of track plan and the overall layout plan, I'm completely blank at the minute. One thing that pains me is the feeling like I need to one-up myself from the previous layouts, as I did the first. For long-term followers of the channel, you'll know the standout feature on the original Great Deltan was the station canopy structure, which was hugely popular and actually put my name out there as an N Gauge YouTuber. And of course, I then went on to make the 3 unique elements on the second layout, being the countryside cutting, the M1, and then something that had never been done before anywhere, the functional karting track. So exactly what do I do with this layout that isn't going to seem underwhelming to myself and viewers? Something I have considered is an open frame system as opposed to what I'm used to with just frame and board. This would give far more versatility and give the layout much more elevation. I know for a fact I'd like to include a branch line on this layout, as I did with the first layout, for some operational interest and for a train to actually go from station to station. Revolution Trains recently released their 1938 underground stock, which I had an idea to repaint one into a custom livery and name it the Deltan Dart, which would run from the main station Deltan Central to Great Deltan, with a mid-stop at yet-to-be-named small station, if the room permits. An underground platform could easily be modelled too, with a cutout for viewing, which I think would look brilliant, with the escalators and the underground station concourse. I know that the layout will be very similar to the old one, in that there will be an urban side and a more rural side. A couple of other things I know I want to include are platforms long enough to accommodate a full-length Caledonian sleeper train and a long straight section of track, something I didn't have in the quantity I wanted on the previous layout. I would like to include a bit more point work for this project and a bit more complexity to the track plan than the previous 2 layouts, but nothing overly complicated. The level of detail will far excel that of both previous layouts, since I have so much time to do it, being on our own hearth finally as well. Things like overhead catenary, weathered vehicles, all of the stock upgrades and hopefully an automated branch line will make this layout my best work yet, and I do hope that you are all keen to follow along with me on this new layout. So I'm going to bring this video to a close now. This was just really to touch base and give you all an update as to what's happened, what has become of the old layout, and to confirm that I will be going ahead with a new layout once again. So thank you all for watching Great Deltan. I shall soon be back with some more content regarding the stock upgrades, but until then, stay safe, hope you're all doing well, and bye bye.